There is a set of instructions buried inside the book of Proverbs so old, so quietly ignored by modern culture, that most Christians today have never organized them into what they actually are. Not scattered advice, not a nice sentiment for a Sunday morning, a complete financial law written thousands of years before banks, before credit scores, before a single dollar bill ever existed, and yet somehow more relevant to your bank account right now than almost anything you will read this year. And here's the strange part. Almost none of these rules involve simply making more money. Most of them involve something far less glamorous: character, restraint, patience, the kind of qualities modern financial culture treats as optional, but Scripture treats as absolutely non-negotiable. If you have ever felt like you were doing everything right financially, working hard, trying to be responsible, and still felt like something was quietly working against you, stay with this, because there is a strong chance one of these ancient rules has been broken somewhere along the way without you even realizing it. And once you see all of them laid out together, you will understand why so many people work incredibly hard and still never seem to get ahead. Let's begin with the first rule, and it is the one most people get backward before they even start. Rule 1: you do not own it, you manage it. Psalm 24 verse 1 lays the foundation for everything that follows. The earth is the Lord's, and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. This is not poetic language, this is a legal declaration, and it changes the entire framework through which every other financial decision must be filtered. If everything ultimately belongs to God, then the money sitting in your account right now was never truly yours to begin with. You are not the owner, you are the manager, entrusted temporarily with resources that belong to someone else. Jesus reinforces this exact idea in the parable of the talents, Matthew chapter 25. A master entrusts 3 servants with different amounts of money before leaving on a journey. When he returns, he does not ask them how much they enjoyed spending. He asks what they did with what was entrusted to them. This single shift in perspective quietly dismantles so much of the anxiety modern people carry around money, because managers do not panic the way owners panic. A manager's job is not to accumulate for themselves at all costs. A manager's job is to be faithful with what has been entrusted to them and to answer, eventually, to the actual owner. Which leads directly into the second rule, one that most people violate without even realizing it, because our entire culture is structured to encourage the exact opposite. Rule 2: avoid the trap of debt bondage. Proverbs 22:7 states this with startling bluntness. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. Slave. That is the word Scripture chooses deliberately to describe what reckless debt actually does to a person's freedom. Not a minor inconvenience, not simply a monthly payment, a form of bondage where someone else, not God, not your own conscience, but a lender, holds meaningful power over your decisions, your time, your future choices, your ability to give generously when God calls you to. This does not mean every single form of debt is automatically sinful. Scripture does not draw that rigid a line, but it does mean debt should never be entered into casually, without extreme caution, because Scripture is warning you plainly. The moment you borrow recklessly, you have handed a portion of your freedom to someone else, and that freedom is far more costly to reclaim than most people realize when they sign the agreement, often at a kitchen table late at night, convinced this one purchase will finally make life feel complete. This brings us to a rule that sounds almost boring compared to everything else, and yet it might be the most quietly powerful of them all. Rule 3: small, consistent effort beats reckless shortcuts every single time. Proverbs 13:11 draws a sharp contrast that modern culture desperately needs to hear. Dishonest money dwindles away, but whoever gathers money little by little makes it grow. Little by little,
not overnight, not through some clever scheme discovered on the internet at midnight, through steady, patient, unglamorous accumulation over time. This single verse quietly condemns almost any get-rich-quick impulse our culture constantly feeds us, while affirming the slow, unglamorous path most people are tempted to abandon out of impatience. Proverbs 28:20 reinforces this even further. A faithful person will be richly blessed, but one eager to get rich will not go unpunished. Notice the contrast embedded in that verse. Faithfulness is rewarded. Eagerness, meaning impatience, urgency, the refusal to wait, carries consequence. Scripture is not condemning ambition, it is condemning the specific impatience that makes people vulnerable to fraud, to reckless risk, to decisions made from desperation rather than wisdom, the kind of decisions that feel bold in the moment and devastating in hindsight. Which naturally leads into the fourth rule, one that requires looking further ahead than most people are willing to look. Rule 4. Prepare today for a season you cannot yet see. Proverbs 6, verses 6 through 8 point to one of the smallest creatures in Scripture as a model of financial wisdom. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. No commander, no overseer. The ant does not prepare because someone forces it to. It prepares because it understands instinctively that seasons change and today's abundance will not last forever without deliberate action taken in advance. This exact principle plays out on a massive scale in the story of Joseph, Genesis chapter 41. Given authority over Egypt's resources, Joseph does not consume the abundant harvest of the good years. He stores it, systematically, deliberately, preparing for a famine no one else could yet see coming. And when the famine finally arrives, that preparation doesn't just sustain Egypt, it becomes the very reason surrounding nations and eventually Joseph's own family survive at all. Proverbs 21:20 captures this same wisdom in a single line. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. Fools are not condemned for having resources, they're condemned for consuming them immediately, with no thought for tomorrow, no margin, no reserve for the inevitable seasons of difficulty Scripture assumes will eventually come. This is where Rule 5 enters, and it might be the most personally confronting of them all, because it strikes directly at the heart's posture rather than at behavior alone. Rule 5. Contentment is not settling, it is spiritual strength. 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 through 8 offer one of the most countercultural statements in all of Scripture. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Great gain, not resignation, not giving up on ambition. Scripture actually calls contentment a form of gain on the same level as wealth itself. This single idea dismantles the exhausting cycle so many people live inside, always chasing the next milestone, never satisfied, convinced that peace is waiting just past the next raise, the next purchase, the next achievement that somehow never quite delivers the peace it promised. This does not mean Scripture forbids growth or ambition or working towards a better financial future. It means the emotional foundation underneath that pursuit must be contentment, not desperation. Because desperation makes people vulnerable to every other rule on this list being broken one compromise at a time. Which brings us to Rule 6, and this one governs not how you manage money privately, but how you conduct yourself when money changes hands with other people. Rule 6, integrity in every transaction, even when no one is watching. Proverbs 11:1 delivers one of the strongest statements in the entire book. The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him.
Detests, not dislikes, not disapproves of, detests. And notice what is actually being condemned here. Not theft in some dramatic, obvious sense, but subtle dishonesty, small manipulations in a transaction that most people around you would never even notice.
God notices every single time. This rule extends into every corner of modern financial life: the way you price your work, the way you describe a product you are selling, the way you fill out a tax form, the way you handle a refund you technically were not required to give. Integrity, according to Scripture, is not measured in the big, obvious moments. It is measured in the small, invisible ones, when honesty costs you something and no one would ever know if you chose otherwise. Now we arrive at Rule 7, and this one reframes the entire purpose behind every other rule combined. Rule 7: what flows in must also flow out. Proverbs 3 verses 9 and 10 offer one of the clearest pictures of financial obedience in all of Scripture. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the firstfruits of all your crops, then your barns will be filled to overflowing. Firstfruits, not what remains after every other obligation has been satisfied. First. This single principle reorders the entire flow of financial priority, placing generosity not at the end of the list, but near the very beginning, an act of trust performed before the full picture of provision is even visible. 2 Corinthians 9:6 completes this thought with a metaphor drawn directly from agriculture. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Money in God's economy was never designed to simply accumulate in one place indefinitely. It was designed to move, to flow, sown deliberately so that a harvest could eventually follow. A river that stops moving does not stay pure, it stagnates, and Scripture consistently warns against a life where resources are gathered and gathered and gathered, but never released. Which brings us finally to an eighth rule, one that ties every principle before it into a single, unavoidable question about accountability. Rule 8: what you do with little reveals what you would do with much. Return once more to the parable of the talents. 2 servants take what they were given and put it to work, multiplying it faithfully. The third servant, given the least, does something that seems safe on the surface, but is actually rooted in fear. He buries his portion in the ground, protecting it from risk, but also ensuring it produces absolutely nothing. And when the master returns, Matthew 25:21 records his response to the faithful servants. "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." Notice once again the underlying pattern that has been present in every rule on this list. Faithfulness with little comes first. Increase follows as a result, never as the starting point. Luke 16:10 states the same principle even more directly. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. This is perhaps the most sobering rule of all, because it means your current financial habits, however small the amounts involved might feel right now, are actually functioning as evidence. Evidence of whether increase, if it arrived tomorrow, would be stewarded wisely or would simply multiply the same patterns of carelessness already present today. So here's what happens when you place all 8 of these rules together, side by side, and see them not as isolated verses scattered across different books, but as a single coherent system. You do not own it, you manage it, which reframes every decision as an act of stewardship rather than personal accumulation. You avoid the bondage of reckless debt, protecting the freedom Scripture describes as too valuable to hand over carelessly. You pursue steady, patient growth instead of desperate shortcuts, trusting the slow process Scripture consistently rewards. You prepare today deliberately for seasons you cannot yet see, following the quiet wisdom of a creature with no commander telling it to, and the strategic foresight of a man who saved an entire nation. You anchor your heart in contentment, refusing to let ambition curdle into desperation. You conduct every transaction with integrity, even in the moments no one else would ever notice the difference. You release what flows in, understanding that resources were never meant to simply collect, but to move generously, deliberately, as an act of ongoing trust. and you recognize that faithfulness with the small amount currently in your hands is the exact proof God uses to determine whether greater increase would be a blessing to you or simply a larger version of the same neglect already. None of these rules on their own will make you wealthy overnight. That was never the point. Scripture was never interested in overnight. What these 8 rules actually produce, when followed together consistently over years rather than days, is something far more valuable than a sudden windfall. They produce a life financially aligned with the character of the God who entrusted you with resources in the first place, a life marked not by anxious accumulation, but by peace, integrity, patience, and quiet, steady faithfulness. So here's the question worth sitting with long after this video ends. Of these 8 ancient rules, which one has quietly been broken in your own life without you even realizing it? Because Scripture doesn't leave that question unanswered forever. It leaves it patiently waiting for the moment you are finally ready to bring your financial life back into alignment with the God who owns it all and simply asked you from the very beginning to manage it well.